There is a number. It has no name that most people would recognize. It is called the fine structure constant, a dimensionless number approximately equal to 1 divided by 137. It describes the strength of the electromagnetic force relative to other fundamental forces in the universe. And if it were even slightly different, not dramatically different, not orders of magnitude different, but different by a fraction so small it is almost impossible to write, atoms could not form, stars could not burn, chemistry could not exist, life could not arise. Physicists have measured this number to extraordinary precision. They agree on the value completely. What they do not agree on, what they have not agreed on for 100 years, through generations of the smartest people our species has produced, is what it means. One group looks at that number and sees evidence of design, a universe calibrated to permit the existence of conscious beings who can look back at the calibration and ask why. The other group looks at the same number and sees a sampling effect. We live in one of an enormous number of universes, and naturally we find ourselves in the one compatible with life, because we could not exist in any other. Same number, same precision, completely different conclusions. This is the conversation we are going to have today. This is not a video about who is right. This is not a video designed to persuade you toward faith or away from it. This is a video about why two groups of honest, intelligent, rigorously thinking human beings can look at the same universe, the same Big Bang, the same DNA, the same laws of physics, the same experience of consciousness, and arrive at fundamentally different conclusions about what it means. And why, when you actually understand both positions from the inside, neither one looks like ignorance or delusion. There is a specific number in physics that sits at the center of this argument. We will get back to it. But first, a Catholic priest and a very persistent hiss. Stay with me. In 1927, a Belgian Catholic priest named Georges Lemaitre proposed something that almost nobody wanted to be true. He proposed that the universe had a beginning, not that it had always existed in its current form, but that there was a moment, a specific moment before which there was nothing, no space, no time, no matter, no laws of physics, nothing. And then, from a point of infinite density and temperature, everything we can observe exploded into existence and has been expanding ever since. When he presented this to Albert Einstein, Einstein told him his mathematics were correct, but his physics were abominable. Einstein had spent years developing a static universe model specifically to avoid the implication of a beginning. Because a beginning raised questions he did not want physics to have to answer. He later called his resistance to Lemaitre's conclusion the biggest blunder of his career. The universe had a beginning. That is now the scientific consensus. It is not seriously disputed. But here is where the conversation starts, because the beginning is not neutral territory. For the Christian, a universe with a beginning is exactly what Genesis chapter 1 describes. In the beginning, 3 words that have been in the text for 3,000 years. A universe that began is a universe that was caused, and a universe that was caused points towards something outside itself that did the causing. Thomas Aquinas built his entire cosmological argument on exactly this logic 800 years before the Big Bang was confirmed. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. And that cause, existing outside space and time, uncaused and necessary, is what we call God. The atheist does not find this logic compelling, not because it is bad logic, but because it proves less than it appears to. Even if the universe requires a first cause, nothing in the argument establishes that the first cause is personal, conscious, or loving. The argument proves at most an impersonal initial condition. And if God can exist without a cause, why cannot the universe, or whatever preceded the universe, also exist without a cause? The atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell put it simply: the universe just is. It does not require explanation any more than God does. And then in 1965, 2 engineers at Bell Labs in New Jersey were trying to calibrate a communications antenna. They kept picking up a faint microwave hiss coming equally from every direction in the sky. They assumed the equipment was malfunctioning. They cleaned it thoroughly. They removed pigeon droppings from the antenna twice. The hiss remained. It was coming from the sky itself. What Arno, Penzias, and Wilson had accidentally discovered was the cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang, the oldest light in the universe, still visible today as a faint warmth in every direction you look. The universe had a beginning, and the moment that became undeniable was not in a theology lecture. It was in a laboratory in New Jersey with two confused engineers and a very persistent hiss. Here's what most people miss in this story. Georges Lemaitre, the man who established that the universe had a beginning, was a Catholic priest. Francis Collins, the man who led the Human Genome Project and mapped the entire human DNA, is a Christian. The assumption that science and faith are necessarily in conflict is not supported by the actual history of science. Some of the most rigorous scientists alive are believers. Some of the most rigorous scientists alive are atheists. The data does not sort neatly by religion. But it gets stranger, because the universe having a beginning is only the first layer of the problem. The second layer is what the universe looks like once it exists. Stephen Hawking, who spent his career arguing that physics does not require God, wrote this in A Brief History of Time. If the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million, the universe would have recollapsed before it had reached its present size. 1 part in 100,000 million. That is the margin of error within which we exist. And that is just the expansion rate. The cosmological constant, the value that determines the energy density of empty space, is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the power of 120. The mass of the electron, the strength of gravity, the ratio of electromagnetic force to gravitational force, the number we started with, the fine structure constant, each of these values sits in an extraordinarily narrow range compatible with the existence of complex structures, chemistry, life, and consciousness. Change any of them significantly and the universe produces nothing interesting. No stars, no planets, no molecules, no you. Pay attention to this. The atheist explanation for this is the multiverse. If an enormous, possibly infinite, number of universes exist, each with different physical constants, then it is not surprising that we find ourselves in one compatible with life. We could not exist in any other. The observation that our universe is life-permitting is not evidence of design. It is a selection effect. Of course, we are here to notice that we are here. This is a serious argument. It is taken seriously by serious physicists. But it has a philosophical cost that is rarely acknowledged openly. The multiverse is, by definition, unobservable. It cannot be tested. It cannot be falsified. It is an explanatory framework that requires you to believe in an enormous number of undetectable entities. To explain away the appearance of design in the one universe you can actually observe. The Christian looks at the same fine-tuning and says, the simplest explanation for a universe calibrated to produce conscious beings is that a conscious being calibrated it. The design inference is not a gap in our knowledge. It is a conclusion from our knowledge. And the God hypothesis does not add an unexplained entity. It grounds the explanation in a being whose existence makes the calibration intelligible. The atheist looks at the Christian and says, you are replacing one mystery with a bigger one. If the universe requires a designer because of its complexity, the designer requires a designer because of theirs. Richard Dawkins calls this the ultimate Boeing 747 gambit. The probability of God existing is even lower than the probability of the universe spontaneously assembling. You have not explained complexity. You have pushed it back one step. The Christian looks at the atheist and says, you are applying a rule, everything complex requires a designer, and then exempting God from it by definition. But God is not complex in the sense you mean. God is not assembled from parts. God is simple, not in the sense of unsophisticated, but in the philosophical sense of not being composed of prior elements. Alvin Plantinga and Thomas Aquinas both make this argument. Dawkins, his critics say, has not engaged with it seriously. Same universe, same data, two positions, each internally coherent, each requiring something the other finds insufficient. You are beginning to see why this conversation has not ended in 400 years of modern science. Two positions. Neither one is stupid, neither one is dishonest. And the evidence, the same evidence, can be read in two genuinely different directions by two genuinely reasonable people. Subscribe, because what comes next is where the conversation goes somewhere that pure physics cannot follow, and where both sides are required to be more honest than they usually are in public. There is a problem that physics cannot solve. You are reading this right now, and there is something it is like to be you reading it. Not just photons hitting your retina and neurons firing in your visual cortex. That is the physical description, and it is accurate as far as it goes. But alongside those physical processes, there is an experience. A subjective, first-person, felt sense of what it is like to be the particular conscious entity that is you in this moment, processing these words. Why? David Chalmers, an atheist philosopher at NYU, named this the hard problem of consciousness in 1995, and it is genuinely hard. Neuroscience can map every neuron that fires when you feel joy or pain or confusion. It can tell you which parts of the brain activate and which neurotransmitters are released. What it cannot tell you is why any of that physical activity feels like anything from the inside. The explanatory gap between the physical description and the subjective experience is not a gap we are close to bridging. It is a gap whose existence most neuroscientists acknowledge and whose explanation nobody has offered. The atheist position is that consciousness is an emergent property of sufficiently complex physical systems, that when neurons interact in the right patterns at sufficient scale, something that did not exist at lower levels of organization arises. Subjective experience is real, but it is physical. We just do not yet understand how. The explanation will come from neuroscience and physics. Give it time. The Christian position is that consciousness is exactly what you would expect if the universe was created by a conscious being who made conscious creatures in his image. The existence of subjective experience is not a mystery to be explained away. It is a clue about the nature of reality. A universe that produces beings who can ask why there is something rather than nothing is a universe that was meant to produce them. Francis Collins, who mapped the human genome, who understands the physical substrate of consciousness better than almost anyone alive, looks at the hard problem and sees a pointer, not a proof, a pointer toward a reality that physical explanation alone cannot exhaust. Stephen Hawking looked at the same problem and said, "Philosophy is dead. Physicists are the new philosophers. The answers will come from science." He was not wrong that physics has answered things philosophy could not. He may have been overconfident about how far physics can reach. And then there is the problem that the atheist finds most compelling, and that the Christian finds most painful. A child is born with a degenerative neurological disease. She will not walk. She will not speak. She will live in increasing pain for several years and then die. She has done nothing wrong. She has hurt no one. By any reasonable standard, she deserves none of what is happening to her. If an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God exists, why does this happen? The Christian responses are serious. Free will explains much human suffering, but not this. Soul-making theodicy argues that suffering builds character and depth, but this child will not live long enough to benefit. Greater good arguments suggest that God permits suffering for purposes beyond our comprehension. But at what point does the suffering exceed what any conceivable purpose could justify? Bertrand Russell said, "Not enough evidence, God, not enough evidence." And the problem of evil is the reason most atheists give for their atheism, not the science, not the philosophy, the child in the hospital bed. The Christian does not have an answer that makes the pain go away. The Christian has a response, that the God of the Bible is not a distant, unmoved mover but a being who entered the suffering, took it into himself, and promises that it will not have the final word. That is either true or it is not, but it is not a dismissal of the problem. It is an engagement with it at the deepest possible level. Now watch what happens when you put these two positions next to each other honestly. The atheist says, the suffering proves God does not exist, or is not good, or is not powerful. The Christian says, the suffering is real, it is agonizing, and it is not the end of the story. Both positions require something beyond what the evidence alone can establish. The atheist requires confidence that no sufficient reason for the suffering exists, which is a claim about what an omniscient being could or could not know, which the atheist cannot access. The Christian requires confidence that the story is not over, which is a claim about what has not yet been revealed, which requires trust. Both positions at their limit require faith. And now, that number I mentioned at the very beginning, the fine structure constant, 1 divided by approximately 137, the number that governs the strength of the electromagnetic force, the number whose precise value permits atoms, chemistry, stars, planets, and everything alive on this one. The atheist explanation. We live in one of an unimaginable number of universes, each with different values, and we are here because we could not be anywhere else. The Christian explanation. The number reflects the intention of a creator who wanted a universe capable of producing beings who could know him. Here is what I need you to notice about those two explanations. Both of them require believing in something you cannot directly observe. The multiverse is undetectable by definition. If other universes existed with different constants, they would be causally disconnected from ours, producing no observable evidence. God is also undetectable by direct scientific measurement. By definition, a being outside the physical universe would not show up in instruments designed to measure the physical universe. The question, therefore, is not science versus faith. Both positions require faith. The atheist's faith that an infinite ensemble of unobservable universes explains the one we can see. The Christian's faith that an unobservable personal God intentionally calibrated the one we can see. The difference is not between evidence and no evidence. The difference is in what kind of explanation you find more compelling when the evidence runs out. And the evidence always runs out, for everyone, eventually. Albert Einstein, who did not believe in a personal God, wrote this: the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. He meant it as a statement of awe, but it is also a philosophical problem. Why should the universe be comprehensible? Why should the laws of physics be mathematical? Why should a mind that evolved on the African savanna to avoid predators and find food be capable of understanding quantum mechanics and general relativity? The Christian answer: because the universe was made by a rational mind, and the rational minds inside it are made in that image, and therefore the universe is the kind of place that rational minds can understand. The atheist answer: evolution selected for cognitive abilities that happen to be general enough to extend beyond their original context. We got lucky. Both answers are serious. Both answers leave something unexplained. And the conversation between them, the real conversation, not the shouting match that usually passes for it, is one of the most important conversations a human being can have. Blaise Pascal, who invented the calculator, who developed probability theory, who was one of the great mathematical minds of the 17th century and also a Christian mystic, wrote this: the heart has reasons that reason does not know. He was not dismissing reason. He was pointing at its limit. There is a point at which the evidence has been weighed and the arguments have been followed and the physics has been done, and something else is required: a response of will, a decision about what you are going to do with the fact that the universe exists, that you are conscious, that you will die, and that neither science nor philosophy has yet told you why any of it is happening. That decision is yours. Before I give you the 3 things I want you to carry out of this video, if this has opened something for you, subscribe and share it with someone who has written off the other side without actually understanding what the other side is saying, because the conversation is better than the caricatures. 3 things. First, the conflict between atheism and Christianity is not a conflict between science and ignorance. The universe having a beginning, the fine-tuning of physical constants, the origin of life, and the hard problem of consciousness are genuine open questions, not gaps that science has already filled or is obviously about to fill. Serious atheist scientists and serious Christian scientists look at the same data and reach different conclusions. The data does not settle the argument, it deepens it. Second, both positions, at their limit, require faith. The atheist who explains fine-tuning with the multiverse is postulating an infinite ensemble of unobservable universes. The Christian who explains fine-tuning with design is postulating an unobservable personal God. Neither inference is irrational. Neither is forced by the evidence alone. Both require a step beyond what measurement can establish. The honest question is not who has evidence and who has faith. It is what kind of faith each position requires, and whether you find that faith reasonable. Third, and this is the one I want you to sit with, the strongest atheist argument is not the science. It is the child in the hospital bed, innocent, suffering, dying. And the strongest Christian argument is not the cosmological constant. It is the claim that God did not watch the suffering from a distance, that he entered it, took it into himself, and is present in it in a way that changes what the suffering means. Neither argument can be evaluated by physics. Both require you to decide what you believe about the nature of reality at the level where measurement ends and meaning begins. The universe is comprehensible. Einstein found that incomprehensible. Both the atheist and the Christian find it astonishing. They just disagree about what the astonishment is pointing toward. Which question do you find hardest, the fine-tuning of the universe, the hard problem of consciousness, or the suffering of the innocent? Tell me below. I read every single one. The universe began. It is calibrated with precision that staggers the imagination. It produced conscious beings who can ask why. Neither side has fully explained any of those three facts, and the conversation between the people trying, the honest conversation, conducted with rigor and humility, is one of the most important things human beings do. It is not finished yet, and you are part of it.